We are just so excited here in the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Department and the Diversity and Inclusion Council to welcome the esteemed poet Glenn North. He is the poet laureate for 18th and Vine and also so happens to be my cousin. I'm extremely proud of Glenn and thrilled that we get to have this conversation with him today. I'll start out by reading his bio. Glenn North is currently the executive director of the Bruce R. Watkins Cultural Heritage Center. He received his master's in fine arts in creative writing from UMKC. Glenn is the author of City of Song, a collection of poems inspired by Kansas City's rich jazz tradition and the triumphs and tragedies of the African American experience. He is a Cave Canem Fellow, a Callaloo Creative Writing Fellow, and a recipient of the Charlotte Street Generative Performing Artist Award and the Crystal Field Poetry Award. North's work has appeared in the Langston Hughes Review, Kansas City Voices, One Shot Deal, The Sixth Surface, Caper Literary Journal, KC Studio, Cave Canaan Anthology, the African American Review, and American Studies Journal. He's collaborated with legendary jazz musician Bobby Watson on the critically acclaimed recording project Check Cashing Day and is currently filling his appointment as the Poet Laureate of 18th and Vine Historical Jazz District. I will start out by saying we, both Glenn and I, have the gift of being born into a highly creative family. The stories behind, we have great storytellers in our family. We have gifted writers, gifted poets. We are just really have been gifted with a cadre of creatives in our family. And that started in large part was generated by our grandmother. And our grandmother had a master's degree. She was an avid, studious person of literature. She loved literature. And my father often told the story that one of the ways that she used to impart lessons to her children instead of fussing, that was too direct, she had a repertoire of poems in her head that she memorized. And she would recite a poem to the children to teach them a lesson. And that's how she imparted lessons and knowledge. And so, as a young person, Glenn spent a lot of time with our grandmother, and she helped him cultivate and develop his love of poetry. I'll let him elaborate a little bit more on that, and I am going to turn it over to Glenn. He will be doing a reading of several of his works that capture Black history and the Black American experience living in this country. And at the end of his readings, I will ask a couple of questions and then we will open up the questions to come from the audience. We ask that you put your questions in the chat box and the administrators will then ask Glenn the questions and he'll respond to those. All right, thank you.
All right. So good afternoon, everybody. I appreciate you all being here. Thank you so much, Maria, for inviting me. Congratulations on your new gig. I'm excited for you. I know that Truman is very fortunate to have you. So as Maria said, I will be sharing some poems today. I see this as more of a conversation than like a strict academic poetry reading. And as Maria said, my grandmother was very instrumental in giving me this love that I have for poetry. And I'll talk more about that as we go on, but I'm going to jump right in and I will start with a poem called My Name Is, and it's based on a writing exercise that I do with students and workshops that I facilitate. We talk about the importance of names and we talk about how names can impact who we are. And one of the examples that I use is one that I'm sure you're familiar with. So if somebody is applying for a job at a company and resumes are received, the resume that has Brad's name on there as opposed to Jamal's will probably be the person who gets the interview. And so our names say a lot about us, a lot about who we are. And this poem is called simply My Name Is. My name is Glenn Albert North Jr., named after my father, of course, who was the son of Basil North Sr., who was the son of Horace North, who was the son of, well, we aren't exactly sure, because the names and lives of those who had been enslaved were not deemed worthy of documentation. When I was 13, I learned that my name, a transliteration from the Gaelic language, means valley or a spacious grassy area, which to my way of thinking is a lot like me. Yes, to my way of thinking, I'm much like a low-lying patch of infinite emerald green where shepherds can feed their flocks, where lonely travelers descending from the far-flung hills can find comfort and rest, which is to say, I'm a pretty laid back guy. Yes, my name sits soft on the tongue, fits in your mouth like a warm spring rain that coaxes dandelions to burst through the top layer of soil, stemming a million tiny suns. My name is Louise North, the grandmother who taught me to spill my blood on countless blank pages so that the world would never forget I was here. My name is Michael Brown. My name is Trayvon Martin. My name is Ahmaud Arbery. My name is George Floyd. My name is the name of every Black boy, every Black man murdered at the hands of cowards fearing the rise of a Black planet. My name is Legion. My name is the roar of distant thunder, the defiant chant of brown protesters filling city streets, the jubilant chorus of hymns piercing the roof of the cathedral. My name is this body I offer as a living sacrifice to a jealous God who will exact his wrath on all those who foolishly believe that justice will be limited to this world. My name is. The second poem I would like to share with you is one called, well, it's named after a painting. And this painting is one that I came across in the Nelson, and it's still there in the modern art section. And it's a painting by a Jewish painter named Joseph Hirsch. And in the painting, there's this Black woman who's obviously distraught. She's holding a baby who's crying, and there's this deep, rich blue background. And you know something bad has happened. But when you see the title of the painting, you discover what the thing is, and that the title of the painting is Lynch Family. And so we know then that this woman has lost her husband to a lynching. And so that poem just really spoke to me. And you know, as the director here at Bruce R. Watkins, I'm involved in several different community organizations, and one of them is the Community Remembrance Project, and we work with the Equal Justice Initiative that was started by Brian Stevenson, and we look at the history of lynching in America in general, but in Missouri in particular. And there were 60 documented racial terror lynchings between 1877 and 1950 here in Kansas City. I'm sorry, here in Missouri. And with the project, there are several things that we're doing. We look at the history of the people who are the victims. We tell their stories. We do soil collection ceremonies at the sites where they were lynched. And when I say racial terror lynching, I mean the kind of lynchings where people would have picnics. It was kind of this carnival atmosphere. They would take photographs and trade postcards, like baseball cards of men who had been lynched, and just a horrific page in America's history. And this painting to me so eloquently spoke to that. And as a response, I wrote a poem called Lynch Family Blues. Went out swinging last night, baby. Hope you didn't wait up for me. Said I was swinging all night, baby. Did you stay up late for me? I wasn't swinging in no joint, darling. I was out on the limb of a tree. Now I'm walking on air, baby. Feels almost like I'm free. My feet steady kicking the wind. Yeah, I'm close to being free. And for the first time in my life, baby, white folks is looking up to me. Hear me, son. Your daddy loves you. Keep hanging. onto hope. You the man of the house now, gotta help your mama cope. Daddy won't be coming home no more. You see, I reached the end of my rope. Lynch Family Blues. So that poem was written out of the blues tradition, obviously. And when I think about, how that poem kind of evolved, I have to give some credit to Langston Hughes, one of the great poets of the Harlem Renaissance. And, I was having a conversation with Maria about the reading, and I thought that with this being a Black History Month program, it would be interesting to insert some of the influences that I've had over the years. And there are two schools of poetry that I really feel uh, have shaped who I am as a poet, and that is the Harlem Renaissance and the Black Arts Movement. But Langston Hughes um, was one of the first poets to really use jazz and blues music as inspiration for his work. He is the progenitor of a subgenre of poetry called jazz poetry. And this is one of his early poems, and it's a blues poem as well. And it's called The Morning After. And you'll notice the tone is a little bit lighter than the poem that I just shared. So this is The Morning After by Langston Hughes. I was so sick last night, I didn't hardly know my mind. So sick last night, I didn't know my mind. I drunk some bad liquor that almost made me blind. Had a dream last night, thought I was in hell. I dreamt last night, thought I was in hell. Woke up and looked around me, babe, your mouth was open like a great big whale. I said, baby, baby, please don't snore so loud. Baby, please don't snore so loud. You just a little bitty woman, but you sound like a great big crowd. Morning After by Langston Hughes. So one of the things that I'm always impressed by in terms of the Black experience is how, in spite of our struggles, we always manage to find joy. And thinking about that was the inspiration for this poem that I'd like to share, and it's called Why Black Folks Like to Dance. And it opens with a quote from Ralph Ellison in a book he wrote called Shadow and Act. And he said, for the art, the blues, the spirituals, the jazz, the dance was what we had in place of freedom. Why Black folks like to dance. You study the darkness of my body, desiring to know the curve and the line. Whips scarred my back but never broke my spine. You implement strategies designed to steal what's inherently mine. You want to move like me, to groove like me, to boogaloo like me, but your body can't move like mine because it never needed to. I cakewalked out your slavery and you couldn't lynch my blues. You even tried to dance like me, but you stuck with two left shoes. My hips undulate with a passion that could shake pine cones loose. My frame contorts in ways that Sherlock could not deduce. With every oppressor I face and throughout every abuse, my movements possess a beauty only struggle could produce. I keep it moving with the quickness, with the Panthers' agility. Got a Lindy hop too fast for the naked eye to see. I call my left leg Malcolm, and Martin is my right. I can march the streets of Birmingham at noontime and dance all Saturday night. Never understood how you could love my music, my walk, my talk, my style, but hate me so intensely. Why am I so reviled? Is it because the day is surely coming that America will turn brown? May not ever get the answers on this side of eternity, but one thing is for certain, I'm gonna keep on doing me. I'm gonna dance like there's no tomorrow, and I'm gonna sing at the top of my lungs. It ain't no use in fighting when I've already won. So I began my work in cultural institutions at the American Jazz Museum. I was doing some workshops there, jazz poetry workshops, and they went very well. And the director at the time thought I would be a good addition to the education department. So I became the poet in residence there. And For those of you who may not know, Kansas City was an epicenter for jazz music from the 20s to the 50s. When Prohibition was in effect, Tom Pendergast ran Kansas City. His family owned a bar, liquor distribution company. A lot of the local politicians would hang out in the bar. And so he had all of these political connections. A lot of mafiosos would also hang out at the bar, so he was connected with the organized crime element here in Kansas City as well. So, in the 1920s, Kansas City became known as a wide open town, and consequently, it became a great place to open up a jazz club. So much so that by the time the 1930s had rolled around, there were over 200 jazz clubs in the greater Kansas City area, with a large concentration of them being between 18th Street and 12th Street. And so after integration, after the 1950s, a lot of Black people began to move outside of that neighborhood. And I would say by the time the 70s rolled around, 18th and Vine had really fallen into disrepair. And so there became this effort then to revitalize the 18th and Vine Jazz District. And I was really excited about that, excited to be, involved with that from a kind of programmatic and creative standpoint anyway. And the idea was to just bring back that vibrancy and that energy to the 18th and Vine area. And thinking about all of those things, I wrote a poem called Revival. There is a place where parched lips kiss warped reeds and cramped fingers stroke strings and keys, filling the air with melodies and resurrected rhapsodies capture the cadence of ancient chants where shackles are removed and our ancestors dance in anticipation of liberty. And every note that's played is dedicated to their memory. There's a place where each heartache and every sharp pain can be soothed and smoothed by a medicinal refrain. The story of King David makes it plain, and it came to pass that when the evil spirit from God was upon Saul, that David took a harp and played with his hand. So Saul was refreshed and was well, and the evil spirit departed from him. You see, this divinely inspired requiem came forth from a glorious past, and although it defies description, we choose to call it jazz. And ever since this magical music emerged from space and time, it has found a permanent residence on 9+9 and Vine. Someday soon you'll travel there to escape from cell phones and emails and faxes, from being overworked and underpaid and paying too many taxes. This is the place where even struggle kicks off his shoes and relaxes, and the only war that will ever take place is the battle of the Saxes. This is the place where jazz is served up as a sensual delight, and it smells like grandmother's chitlins because she always cooks them just right. And it tastes like the peach cobbler she bakes that gets better with every bite. And it feels like love's very first kiss, shared in the soft moonlight. And it looks like Susanna Jones when she wears that red dress. Lord, what a beautiful sight. And it sounds like the jazz disciples cool on a blue Monday night, or like Gabriel's trump at the rapture just before we take flight. So these ministers of music are awaiting your arrival, wanting to provide you with orchestral comfort as you witness the revival, because jazz, like matter, can't be destroyed. It only changes forms. And the historic intersection of 18th and Vine is where jazz will be reborn. Then we will cherish this noble noise and glow in the cool of its heat as the caramel-coated cacophony provides a sonically hypnotic beat that can only ever be heard through the tapping soles of the feet. And as willing slaves to the rhythm, our freedom will be complete. That is Revival. Sharing poetry via Zoom has been a different experience, since the pandemic hit. And usually you have the benefit of being in the presence of people, which I like, and kind of being able to read the room and get a sense of how people are responding. So without benefit of that, I'm hoping that you all are enjoying yourselves and not regretting that you chose to come here this afternoon. Um, I was talking about poets that have influenced me. Another influence of mine is Countee Cullen, who was also writing during the Harlem Renaissance. And the Harlem Renaissance was really a movement about Black artists like Langston Hughes, like Countee Cullen, like Aaron Douglas, the visual artist, like Duke Ellington and the musicians that were performing at that time. There was just this idea that Black artists needed to prove that they were capable of producing high art, art that was worthy of the respect of a mainstream audience. And so, not only that, it was a cry to recognize the humanity in Black people. And so, in this poem, which is a sonnet, Countee Cullen is talking about um, just all of the things that we question God about, and he's thinking about it in the context of being a Black man in America in the 1920s and being a poet as well. It's called Yet Do I Marvel. I doubt not God is good, well meaning, kind, and did he stoop to quibble, could tell why the little buried mole continues blind, why flesh that mirrors him must someday die. Make plain the reason tortured Tantalus is baited by the fickle fruit. Declare if merely brute caprice dooms Sisyphus to struggle up a never ending stair. Inscrutable his ways are, and immune to catechism by a mind too strewn with petty cares to slightly understand what awful brain compels his awful hand. Yet do I marvel at this curious thing to make a poet Black and bid him sing. Yeah. And I too am interested in different forms. The sonnet being probably one of the most popular forms, but um, deceptively, it looks simple, but it's really hard to write. For those of you who may not remember or didn't pay close attention in English class, a sonnet is a 14-line poem that has a particular rhyme scheme and a certain meter, in terms of the emphasis on certain syllables in each line. And so, you have to develop an ear, and it's really a interesting form to work within. Um, but I wanted to write one for Breonna Taylor, who of course, lost her life, kind of a wrong place at the wrong time, even though she was in her own bed asleep, kind of thing. Um, and so the poem is called Her Face in the Flames. And it opens with a quote from the Washington Post, which stated: the three officers involved in the killing of Breonna Taylor were not charged for her death. One officer, Brett Hankison, was charged with 3 counts of first-degree wanton endangerment for shooting a bullet through the wall in a neighbor's apartment. Her face in the flames. If those walls could talk, they would chant your name like a cathedral full of praying saints. Cities burn, we see your face in the flames. They murder us daily, then preach restraint. Seems buildings are worth more than Black bodies, or that's what the courts would have us believe. While the soccer moms go to Pilates and the boys in blue exhale in relief. Every night we sleep on your every night we sleep on our sweat-soaked sheets, dreaming of the day that we'll get ahead. How in the world will we ever compete if we're too busy burying our dead? So we march, we protest, we keep the faith until the next sister killed takes your place. So when I was 8 years old, on my 8th birthday, my grandmother gave me a copy of the poem If by Rudyard Kipling. Um, and I won't recite the whole poem, but it's a poem written from the perspective of a father to a son. And it says, if you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too, if you can wait and not be tired by waiting or being lied about, don't deal in lies or being hated, not give way to hating, and yet not look too good or talk too wise. Um, and it just goes on, and it offers all of these incredible I don't know. It's advice, basically, advice given in the form of a poem. And so when I was 8 years old, my grandmother gives me this poem for my birthday, and I'm really kind of salty at first because she typically, would buy me, toys and clothes sometimes. But to get this poem, I, was like, what is this about? And she challenged me. She said, Glenn, if you memorize that poem, and you live out the philosophy that's being communicated in that poem, you'll be a better man. And so it took me a couple of days, but I memorized the poem, and I remember just how proud I was to be able to recite that poem back to her. And shortly after that, I began writing my own poems. Now, much later in life, I found out that Rudyard Kipling was really xenophobic, was very racist against anybody that wasn't white, quite frankly. And so that was kind of jolting. But for me, poetry has been a way to confront racism. And so he Rudyard Kipling posthumously and unwittingly equipped me with the tool to combat his xenophobic ideology. But anyway, recently, our cousin, and I don't mention this often, Maria was talking about all of the creative folks in our family. One of them, and probably the most famous, of course, is Don Cheadle, the actor. And this past December, he was asked to give the commencement speech at UMKC. And him and I got to talking, and he said, do you have a poem that would be like good advice for a graduating class? And I was thinking, like, if is the perfect poem, for that. And but I didn't have one that I had already written, for him to use. And I just kind of thought about it, and I thought about it, and I said, well, why don't I do kind of my take on the poem "If"? And so this is what I came up with, and it's called "If," the remix. If you can look at yourself in the mirror and hold your gaze without turning away, if you can learn the lessons from your errors and seldom put your winnings on display, if you can be a boss and remain humble, or be a worker proudly mopping floors, if you can get up every time you stumble and knock your way through a city of closed doors, if you can climb each mountain with bloody hands, view the world with compassion from the top, get pushed off with no idea of where you'll land, and choose to remain silent as you drop, if you can love without reservation and not expect anything in return, fight injustice without hesitation, be a place of refuge when cities burn, if you can stay sane in a pandemic, if race nor class determines who you love, if you are both street smart and academic, if getting high on life is your favorite drug, if how you treat others measures your success and what you give means more than what you gain, if in any state you still feel that you're blessed, if you know that along with joy, there must be pain, if you can learn to control your appetites, you will discover the world's greatest wealth. On your journey to reach the highest heights, the greatest skill is mastery of self. I wonder what old Rudyard would think of that. um, I don't know if you all received it. I gave Maria a book on, it's called Kansas City's Black History. And it's one that I began working on when I was at the Black Archives. And the Kansas City Public Library, in conjunction with the Black Archives and Link, which is the local investment commission, all came together to start honoring these figures, prominent African Americans who lived in Kansas City or who were affiliated with Kansas City in some way. And so this year is the Missouri Bicentennial, and we thought it would be cool to kind of do a retrospective of all of the people that we've highlighted up to now, and then to include some essays and original work. It's a wonderful book, and there's so many contributions that were made by Black folks to the evolution of Kansas City. And what I was asked to do is to write a poem that would also be included in this collection. And so this poem that I wrote is called I Sing Their Names. You know, we think about um, how recently we've been talking about say their names, say their names. And oftentimes we're talking about, unfortunately, someone like George Floyd or Sandra Bland, who's been murdered by police violence or what have you. But there's also this need, I think, to sing the names of those people that we celebrate, those people who paved the way and who accomplished great things. And so it's called I Sing Their Names. I said that already. But then there's a quote, an African proverb that says, and it opens with this: until the lions have their own historians, the history of the hunt will glorify the hunter. I sing their names. I know of a place on the confluence of the Missouri and Kansas rivers, originally the home of the Missouri, the Kansas, and the Osage people, the place where York, strolling ahead of Lewis and Clark, set his left foot down and the whole world tilted west. A place that called out to my grandfather, Basil North Sr., who at 16 rode a mule 118 miles from Hartville, Missouri to Jefferson City to attend Lincoln University. He later saved up enough money to send for my grandmother. They both became educators, then moved here to Kansas City. Perhaps that is my origin story. Maybe that's why I love this city more than it loves me. Still proud to say it's where I'm from because I know who came before me. My feet find comfort on their shoulders, those whose light shines brightly beyond February, right into eternity. And so I sing of Langston and Parker, Miss Bluford and Mary Lou, Old Buck, Leon Jordan, Horace and Bruce, Sarah Rector, Junius Groves, Tom Bass and Anna Jones, Count Basie, Chester Franklin, Bernard Powell, and D.A. Holmes. They are legion, and I chant their names almost as if holy, because you have to be careful about who you allow to tell your history. As Malcolm once said, folks that won't treat you right won't teach you right. We must tell our own stories. We claim our narrative. We must read, research, collect, interpret, curate, archive, document, observe, and report. There is a little brown girl in a classroom who has no idea how beautiful her Afro puffs are, and she needs to know. There is a little brown boy who doesn't see himself reflected in a biased curriculum, so he loses interest, gets labeled with a behavior disorder, drops out, runs across the right cop on the wrong day, becomes a headline and a hashtag. He needed to know. There are little white children in schools all over America being taught that the world revolves around them. Before they grow up to believe that it does, they need to know. I know of a place on the confluence of jazz, blues, baseball, and barbecue, home of countless Black lives that certainly mattered. I have no choice but to sing their names. So that's found in Casey Black History. Just a great kind of portal into Kansas City's African American history. There's a great photograph of the opening of the YMCA here in Kansas City, which is where the Negro League started. And on the back cover is Bruce R. Watkins. We are coming to you live from Bruce R. Watkins Cultural Heritage Center, as Maria said. And this is a picture of him marching down I-70 after Dr. King was assassinated, which is another really important part of Kansas City's history that we don't talk about a lot. They were going to air, or they did air, a Dr. King's funeral on TV, and the students had petitioned the school district to allow them to be out of school that day to be able to watch his funeral. And the school board did not agree to that. So several students marched out of class that day, and they were headed to City Hall to really just kind of confront, the mayor and the decision makers about not allowing them to watch Dr. King's funeral. And um, from different accounts, it's really hard to say exactly what happened, but someone threw a bottle, hit a police officer in the foot, and then this kind of violence just erupted from there. Dr. King referred to riots as the language of the unheard, and so I think of them as uprisings. But it went on for 8 days, and so tomorrow we will be working in conjunction with UMKC's LaBuddy Special Collection Library and the Prospect Business Association we're hosting a panel discussion, and the information is on the Bruce R. Watkins website, brucewater.com. It'll be a Zoom presentation just like this one. We've got some great panelists. And I just wanted to say, in this moment, this volatile time that we're living in, it's very easy, to point fingers and assign blame. And there are many reasons for us to be angry, but at the same time, we wanted the panel to have some balance. And so there's an officer that I've come to know over the past couple of years. Officer Jason Cooley will be on that panel, just talking about what the Kansas City Police Department is trying to do. I know they've been under a lot of criticism lately, but what they're attempting to do to connect with the community better. A lot of the trainings that they offer, for instance, active shooter type of training for churches and things like that. Unfortunately, that's a reality, but they do offer that service and a lot of other things and initiatives that Officer Cooley is, trying to implement so that there won't continue to be this big rift between the community and the police. So I just wanted to offer that. And I just wanted to also say, in the poems that I write, it is never, my attempt to offend per se. I do think that sometimes people need to be uncomfortable, that the only way that change takes place is learning to be comfortable with the uncomfortable, that there are difficult conversations that we have to have if things are ever going to move forward. But I'm not in the business of, trying to be accusatory unnecessarily anyway. And so I hope that, if you are white or non-Black, for lack of a better way to put it, that these poems that I share just give you some window into the Black experience, and hopefully will in some way inspire a sense of empathy. I think empathy is so important, and the ability to kind of see things from someone else's perspective is vital if we're ever going to really learn to work together. So this next poem that I want to share is not mine. It's one that comes from Dudley Randall, who was one of the architects of the Black arts movement. So as I said, with the Harlem Renaissance, you got all of these artists who were really trying to appeal to the white gaze, as it's called, trying to live up to kind of like a European standard of what art was. And not to say they were kowtowing in any way, but there was just a different agenda. The Black arts movement that became prominent in the 60s with people like Dudley Randall, Amiri Baraka, Sonia Sanchez, Nikki Giovanni. Um, these artists and writers were all about revolution. They were saying that Black people, we need to create our own aesthetic in spite of the white gaze. You know, Toni Morrison, one of America's greatest writers, was often criticized early in her career because she didn't have hardly any white characters. And all of the critics were saying, well, when she matures and understands that she needs to have a broader perspective. That wasn't her project. She was really focusing specifically on the Black experience. And so, anyway, that was kind of the mindset of those who were a part of the Black arts movement. And so, like I said, Dudley Randall, he was the one who kind of galvanized a lot of the writers and had helped a lot of them get published during that time. And so, this poem is called "The Ballad of Birmingham," but in the interest of Black History Month, I want to just offer some additional context. So some of you may not be familiar with the Children's March that took place in 1963. This was at a point in Dr. King's career where he was really struggling. He had gone to Birmingham, which was the most violent and most racist city in America, and he was trying to get the folks to march. And he knew full well that they would probably, sick dogs on them, turn the fire hoses on them, but he wanted to fill the jails of Birmingham to draw attention to how bad things were. But most of the adults were really fearful. They didn't want to lose their jobs. They didn't want to lose their lives, quite frankly. And so James Bevel, a reverend, he had been working with a lot of young people who, were interested in participating in the movement. And so they decided to have the children march. And so over the course of about 3 days, hundreds of children marched the streets of Birmingham. Of course, they still, had the police dogs sicked on them, the fire hoses, the whole nine. And a lot of them, they just filled the jails of Birmingham. And so it was a very devastating thing to witness, right? And so President Kennedy at the time, after watching this on television, was prompted to enact the Civil Rights Act. He was assassinated before it actually was implemented. Lyndon Johnson came in after and picked up the torch. And but the Civil Rights Act of 1964 had everything to do with voting rights, the end of segregation and housing and public schools. At least the law was passed. Of course, it took a long time for the America to catch up with it, But anyway, that march inspired President Kennedy to enact the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Shortly after that march, the violence in Birmingham continued, and I'm sure you all are familiar with the church bombing in which 4 little girls were murdered. And so Dudley Randall wrote a poem about that called The Ballad of Birmingham. Mother dear, may I go downtown instead of out to play and march the streets of Birmingham in a freedom march today? No, baby, no, you may not go, for the dogs are fierce and wild, and clubs and hoses, guns and jails aren't good for a little child. But mother, I won't be alone. Other children will go with me and march the streets of Birmingham to make our country free. No, baby, no, you may not go, for I fear those guns will fire, but you may go to church instead and sing in the children's choir. She has combed and brushed her night dark hair and bathed rose petals sweet and drawn white gloves on her small brown hands and white shoes on her feet. The mother smiled to know her child was in the sacred place, but that smile was the last smile to come upon her face. For when she heard the explosion, her eyes grew wet and wild. She raced through the streets of Birmingham calling for her child. She clawed through bits of glass and brick, then lifted out a shoe. Oh, here's the shoe my baby wore, but baby, where are you? The Ballad of Birmingham. So, 2019 was the 400th anniversary of the advent of Black people uh, coming to America. That in 1619, the first kidnapped Africans were brought to American shores. And so there were a lot of activities around that 400-year anniversary. And I was reflecting on it and felt that it would be important to write a poem. I was ultimately able to share this poem at a Juneteenth celebration, and it's called 400 Years Still Here. And when you really look at the horror of chattel slavery, the violence, the dehumanization, it's just a wonder that Black people survived that, right? Then after that, racial terror, Jim Crow, segregation, redlining, just any number of things after slavery that still, just deprived Black people of their humanity. And so I'm just always fascinated how, in the midst of all of these um, obstacles, we are still able to do great things. My favorite poet is Lucille Clifton. And so this poem is called 400 Years Still Here. It opens with the quote from her. And she said, "Won't you come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed?" Here is a 400-year-old poem, an elegy of sorts, because we sometimes use metrical compositions to make sense of death. Here is 1619. Here are 20 kidnapped Africans on a Dutch ship brought ashore to the British colony Jamestown, Virginia. Here is American history. Here are 20 souls beginning a history, a horror story with no end in sight. Here is how they stole the intangible. Here is your stolen language. Here is your stolen religion. Here is your stolen body. Here is your stolen mind. Here is where your family should be. Here's your wife. Here's your wife raped. Here's your wife raped while you stand aside and look. How do you write a rape poem? Here is your back. Here is your back bloody. Here is your back bloody and torn to shreds, ribbons of skin dropping to the dust. Here is your head, your body buried up to the neck. Here's your head atop your buried body being used for target practice. Here are 5 million stars over the Atlantic Ocean weeping. Here are 5 million Black bodies on the floor of the Atlantic Ocean. Here is the baby you had in the belly of a slave ship. Here is your baby tossed overboard because you'd rather see him in a grave than let him be a slave. Here is a rusted knife. Here is a rusted knife on your genitals. Welcome to your castration. Here is where the pain begins. Here is white Jesus. Here's white Jesus telling the lie that all will be glorious in the by and by, that slavery is your destiny. Here is your wake-up call. Here is how you learn to stand tall. Here is your time to take up arms and fight for your freedom. Here is so-called emancipation. Here is birth of a nation. Here is how you survive. Here is June 19th, 1865. Here is your 40 acres and a mule. No, wait. My bad, there went your 40 acres and a mule. Here's your neck, here's a noose, here's a tree, joined in a satanic trilogy. Here is your blood, here's your blood memory, here's your blood coursing through your veins, its memory contaminated on a cellular level. Here is winter in America. Here is slavery in a new context. Here is the prison industrial complex. Here is 4 centuries of dysfunction. Here and now is how you function. Here is how you manage. Here is how you cope. Here is how you turn trauma into jazz. Here is how you were built to last. Here here is how you keep on progressing. Here you are a miracle, fulfillment of the dream of your ancestors. And in spite of everything, you are still here. I would like to close up with a poem that I wrote years ago, actually for Black History Month, and it's called Celebration. Black folks know how to struggle like trapped birds who have filled their cages with song like muscles that have been torn and stretched before becoming strong like lumps of coal that emerge as diamonds after being burned and pressured too long. We struggle in style, we suffer and smile, we grieve and we grin, we don't break because we bend, and we never give in because we know God will never give us more than we can handle, which gets us through in the clutch. We just sometimes wish he wouldn't trust us so much. Yes, we play the cards that were dealt us with ease. Who else could turn chitlins into delicacies? Who else could take the N word as much as we hated to hear it and turn it into a term of endearment? Who else could turn slave songs into coded incantations that led to freedom from master's plantation? Who else could take the pain that accompanies truth, give it a soundtrack, and call it the blues? Who else could be broke yet still dress sporty, make a smooth entrance even when arriving tardy, and turn an eviction notice into a rent party? Who else, in the midst of pain and emotional confusion, could turn the tragedy of a funeral into a family reunion? Now, my grandmother taught me when I was a child at home what Paul told the people in Rome, for I reckon that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared to the glory which shall be revealed in us. Now, I speak with all of the strength that has been instilled in us, with the courage of the blood and the sweat that has been spilled for us. May each season of celebration rebuild in us what our oppressors have tried to kill in us. Because who else but a great and mighty nation could take the incessant injustice that we've endured and turn it into a celebration? Thank you all so much for being here. I think that if you stick around, we'll have some time for a couple of questions.
Cousin, I celebrate you.
Oh.
That was so powerful and touched me to my soul. A quick story: when Don started reading If, which is our family poem, that morning that he gave the virtual speech for the graduation, I immediately started sobbing. I think your remix is so fitting and so appropriate, and touched me to my core and my heart, because we were all trained and taught to memorize If. So
Right.
thank you for the remix. Could you tell us a little bit about your work with the youth in the community? I know that you, around the city, do poetry workshops and work with students and with children. Tell us a little bit about your history in Kansas City doing that kind of work.
Okay, so yeah, I just always thought that it was important for me to use whatever I had to work with young people, and the thing I had was poetry, and I started doing that back in 97, 98. But in the early 2000s, I began to hear about international youth poetry festival called Brave New Voices, and thought it would be a great opportunity to take young people to participate in that. And it's a youth poetry festival, but it's a poetry slam. It's students who have written their own poems competing against in teams of 4 to 6 students competing with other high school students from all over the world actually. And it was just a great kind of transformative experience to expose those young people to. They had opportunities to work with legends like the Last Poets and Sonia Sanchez and Amiri Baraka. They would bring all these great poets to facilitate workshops for the students who came. And then after that, I started hearing about Chicago had this organization called Young Chicago Authors, and they were doing a poetry festival similar to Brave New Voices called Louder Than a Bomb. And the idea was that the collective voices of our young people could be louder than the violence that they were encountering in their daily lives and the violence they were witnessing. This was like right after 9/11. And so they made a documentary about how Louder Than a Bomb was impacting youth in Chicago. And we wanted to do something like that. Here, other cities, after seeing the documentary, wanted to do that. So Young Chicago Authors started hosting these kind of trainings so that people could develop a Louder Than a Bomb affiliate in their respective communities. And so I started doing that about 8 years ago. During that time, there was a movement that came out of New York. There was an organization called Urban Word that felt like with all of this talent, all of these, young people who were writing at such a high level, that there should be a youth poet laureate, just as there is, an adult, of course, poet laureate, um, for different cities or different states. Missouri has a poet laureate, several states have a poet laureate. So it started in New York, and then it just really developed momentum. And in fact, we were trying to get a program started here for a youth poet laureate, and we were doing it through the Office of Cultural and Creative Services. But unfortunately, with the economy and some other things, it just never quite came together. But Amanda Gorman, right? She came up through that system. She came up through Brave New Voices, and everyone was just so excited about her performance at the inauguration, as was I. Just a stellar, just eloquent. She just really stepped into that moment with grace, and the poem was wonderful. But it just really kind of felt like validation for me in that the work that I've been doing with young people, the importance of poetry, uh, all of those things just kind of came together in that moment. And, I'll be honest, I've seen over the years, Amanda Gorman is not alone. There are some brilliant voices out here, but she was the right person at the right time.
Lovely,
Yeah.
wonderful. Can you tell, and after this question, I will probably have Russell step in. And if anyone has questions, if you could put your questions into the chat, and we will ask Glenn any questions you may have about anything you heard today or the work he does in the community. If people want to get copies of your published works, how can they do that?
Oh, so my website, and I'll go ahead and put it here in the chat. And it's real simple. It's
Okay.
glennorthpoetry.com. Yeah, so I'm working on a new book. This one is several of the poems that I read today came from City of Song, and that's available by connecting with me on my website.
Okay. Wonderful. Russell, do we have any questions?
We do. Um, yeah, the first one I've got right now came from our HR chief of HR, Ruth Pullins,
Mm.
and her question is, sorry, I think it's a good one. She said that your poetry is rich and deep. Do you write as you feel it, like taking notes on the go, or do you have a place you go to for inspiration?
So right now, the Black experience has been my inspiration. I'm saying right now because I've been really wanting to move into some more personal spaces. I did a poetry reading at William Jewell not long ago, and the young lady said, "You write about all of these, serious topics, but I don't know that you write much about yourself, and so she kind of, with that question, kind of challenged me to start thinking about that. But yeah, so I think about um, a lot of the horrific things that have happened in the Black community, and try to write about those in a way it kind of helps me to process it because I feel those things. I just every time you hear about like a situation with like Ahmaud Arbery, um, it just, I feel it, and writing about it helps me to process it. I also think it's important to celebrate, the Black experience, and so I try to do that in its fullness. The volume of poems that I'm working on now, though, are really I'm trying to be a little more introspective, and not like necessarily confessional and all about me per se, but just more personal and more vulnerable, quite frankly. But yeah, so what I'll typically do, it doesn't always just happen in the moment. I'll kind of meditate on it, and I don't journal religiously, but I write down thoughts. And sometimes it might be a word, right? I just want this word to be in a poem, and I'll write that down. And sooner or later, I'll have enough pieces that I can start kind of playing with and put together, and eventually, that becomes a poem.
Thank you.
Great.
We have another one coming from Linda Sanchez. You answered one about where to get where we can find your published poetry. I put that in the chat. The other
Mhm.
question was, where can we get the Kansas City Black History book that you showed earlier?
From Maria.
Maria. Okay.
We will have PR send out a message about that, and or you can send an email to our department email, and that's equity, diversity, and inclusion at tmcmed.org.
And you can also, I'm putting my email in here, my personal one. You can email me. So our center is, I'm at Bruce R. Watkins, and the center is closed to the general public right now, but we have been a site for COVID testing and vaccinations. And so if you feel like you might be in the neighborhood and want to pick up a copy or two, shoot me an email and I'll be happy to make sure you get one. I know we'll be doing this for at least about the next 2 or 3 weeks.
Awesome.
And for any Truman Med Center people, we've got plenty. So, and like I said, we'll be sending out more communications about the books, but we have plenty to pass out as well.
Perfect. We don't really have a question as much as a comment. Michelle Thomas, she's on the D&I board with us. She writes, I can really appreciate how you write about the social situations infused with spiritual, religious insight, as well as activism and lightheartedness. I think that really connected with her.
Wow. I'm glad that she picked up on the spiritual aspects too. I try not to beat anybody over the head with that, but when we talk about inspiration, a lot of my inspiration also comes from my relationship with God.
Thank you. That's all. That's all I saw in the chat.
Okay.
Oh wait, here.
Glenn,
Mhm.
Oh, sorry. One just came through from somebody else, from Jolie Justice. Feels like poets are finally becoming rock stars again. Are there any young poets you would like us to look out for?
Wow. So
great question.
yeah, that is an awesome question. Gosh. Malcolm London. Nate Marshall, who came up through Louder Than a Bomb out of Chicago. He's got a great collection called The Wild Hundreds. And his most recent book is called Fitna, Finna, like in the Black vernacular, we say we fitna do something. And so that's the title of his book. Who else? That's a good question. There's Morgan Parker. She's getting a little bit older. She's kind of, I think, in her early 30s now, but she's written some great things. And I'll continue to kind of think about that. But that's a really great question. I'll also clue Maria in when So Louder Than a Bomb, right? I talked about that at the Youth Poetry Festival. So we've got some really talented kids right here in Kansas City. And last year, the pandemic just, we weren't able to pivot fast enough to go virtual, but we are planning on having Louder Than a Bomb virtually this year. And so I'll get that information to Maria if anybody's interested in checking out um, some of those events. So we kind of do it like March Madness. So it starts off with like quarterfinals. Everybody participates in those, and then it goes to the semifinals, and then 4 teams compete in the final 4. And so those are just great opportunities to see some of the talented students that are writing here in Kansas City.
One more also kind of, is it okay if I ask one more? Came through?
Yes, we have time.
Michelle again. She said she'll go to the website to look at stuff, but she also said your work with the youth, but what about adults who have a half-hearted skill, but a strong interest to learn to write and or speak word? How about the adults?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I've done some workshops for adults. One that I was really excited about at the Nelson, done work with the Kemper. I do a lot of what's called ekphrastic poetry, like that Lynch family poem that was inspired by the painting. So ekphrastic poetry is just poetry that's written in response to a visual image or a piece of art. And I started doing that probably around 2009. And so as a result of that, I've done a lot of ekphrastic poetry workshops for the Nelson and for the Kemper. I also did some work with Restart, which is a homeless shelter with the adult population there. And I remember when they asked me to do that, me thinking, like, how is this going to work? Like, these people are dealing with, not having a place to stay and trying to figure out their lives. Are they going to want to take time to think about writing a poem? And I was overwhelmed with the response that I got, because you find that people who are experiencing difficulty need a way to express that and grapple with it, or they need a way to kind of escape it and not have to think about it. So for that 2-hour time period, when we would have those workshops, they were able to just kind of not have to worry about all of that and just kind of have a woosah moment, right, with poetry. But I'm not consistently done workshops with adults, but now that you mention it, I think that might be something that would be a good idea for me to do. And if you have an interest, don't call it half-hearted. You know what I mean? That you want to be careful what you tell your brain. I'm always having to convince students that they actually can write. It's a lot of us think that, I don't know, just to me, poetry, one of the things I also love about it is that it's, to me, one of the more accessible arts. Like, it's really difficult to paint, representative paintings, and to draw and to dance. I think there are some people who are just kind of born with certain gifts, but poetry, I think everybody has an opportunity to, may not be a masterpiece, but we've all got a story, right? And so I think that we all have poems in us. It's just a matter of kind of coaxing it out of people. But I'll think about that. And Maria's always giving me ideas about how to monetize what I do, and you know what I mean? So I might talk to her about how we would start facilitating some poetry workshops. We could do them right here at Bruce R. Watkins too, once the threat of the virus subsides.
Absolutely. That's a great idea.
Yeah.
So Russell, is that all you have?
Yeah, that's all we got.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Glenn, it was truly my honor, and thank you. This was amazing. And I have heard many of those, and I can never hear them too much. I just get such a joy out of your work and your artistry. And thank you for sharing it with us today. We truly, truly appreciate it. It lifted my spirit and hopefully opened people's minds and exposed them to some of the experiences of being Black in America. And it was just wonderful. And if you'd like to share any parting words.
Oh, just, thank you so much, Maria. As I said, I'm excited about your new position at Truman and the work that you'll be doing. I mean, it's so important. It was great getting to know Russell and Jake. Thank you guys for all your help. And yeah, I would say, try to, we've got all of these tools that are available to us now with technology. Start doing some research about, poetry and maybe some of the poets that I mentioned, like Langston Hughes and Countee Cullen and Dudley Randall. So I forgot who made the comment about poets being rock stars again, but yeah, it's just been a great journey to see how poetry has evolved over just the time that I've been doing it, I guess, quote unquote, professionally. And we need your support, right? So read more poems. Those are my parting words.
If you have the thought or the idea to write, by all means, write.
Absolutely.
So create. Well, thank you, everyone, so much for giving us your time today. Thank you, Glenn. Thank you to Russell and Jake for all your assistance, and Lori Austin and public relations and marketing. Thank you for all your work on this.
All right. Take care, guys. Try to stay warm.
Take care.